Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back. I think most of us who want to join are here already. Welcome back from your break. My name is Gracia, and I'm the managing editor of Thus. So this workshop is the workshop on crafting written content, and I'm so glad to see so many faces. My team and I are really excited to be able to share with you something that will benefit you and your ministry. We'll be able to take questions at the end. I know we didn't manage to get through all the questions, really, really good questions at Pigeonhole, but we'll also head back into the link after the end of the webinar to answer some of these questions. So you can revisit the link again at the end of today. So yes, I'll be sharing some key things to note when it comes to developing a strategy for crafting written content. And then I'll pass the time over to our copy editor, Gabriel, who will be sharing more details on how you can develop a process to do just that. To begin, I just wanted to share a bit about myself. As you've heard from John, Thus has been around for 4 years, and I actually joined the team about a year and a half ago. Before that, I was actually working in the field of journalism and publishing for 10 years before I sensed the Lord calling me into full-time ministry. I actually like to joke that I used to chase bad news, and now I actually have the chance to share good news. But it's actually really true. This verse pretty much sums up what we do. We are bearers of good news who publish peace and publish salvation. And that's why I say that now I have the chance to actually share good news. And what we do is that we are a small team comprising writers, editors, designers, filmmakers, and we come from churches from different sizes and denominations, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. But we're all united in our purpose to see a generation of young people transformed into the image of Christ. And all our content aims to glorify God and point people to Jesus, which brings me to my next point. So who are we exactly trying to reach? I mean, this might seem like a redundant question, but it's worth spending a bit of time thinking about your target audience. Like Russ mentioned earlier, like Simon mentioned earlier, it's so important to know who you're speaking to really dive into who they are, because a lot of times, a lot of the content ideas and strategies will emerge when you have a clearer idea of who you're writing for. And let me explain why. So you take this list of content personas as an example. You'll see that the content you'll be creating for each persona will be quite different. For example, for the GE, right, for general election, we tried to angle most of our pieces around educating our audience who are fairly new and inexperienced to voting, because we are aware that a huge segment of our demographic are in their 20s. Having said that, our audience profile is fairly wide, from 16-year-olds all the way to 30-somethings. That's roughly, the age range of our audience. So one day we could be speaking to the student who's taking O-levels and wondering if there's any hope for them if they don't do well. And another day we could be speaking to the army recruit who needs encouragement from someone who continued to grow in faith while facing many temptations in the army. And then you also have like the fresh grad who's transiting into the workplace, the young leader who's serving in church. So I think Simon has posted a link for you to download a persona creation kit. I think that's useful. I think that's something that will actually help you to think about what stage of life most of your readers are at. And then you can begin to think about who you want to invest more efforts into reaching, and then go into the next phase, which is really understanding their needs. So this next exercise is really about identifying what makes your audience tick, what keeps them up at night, and what drives them. So for example, what are their passions, right? Knowing their passions, their interests, and their hobbies will give you content ideas. Say, for example, is there a popular game that you can use to talk about Christian values? Or are there Spotify playlists that you can recommend for someone who's anxious? Or what about a new show on Netflix that throws up questions about what relationships are really about? Or if they like sports, what about featuring some footballers who love God, for instance? We did an article on that once. So these are passions, right? Building content around their passions. And then you also need to know their struggles. You have to understand them, like what are they concerned about? Is it about not being able to forgive their parents? Maybe it's about being bullied in school. Or mental health, there's another huge one for this generation. Are they going through depression? And what does the Bible say about that? And finally, consider their aspirations. What do they hope to achieve? What do they want to grow in? For career, I mean, is it about, could you find someone to share about how they discovered their calling in life? For church, what tips can you give for becoming a better cell group leader? Or for relationships, how can you show them what godly marriage is like? So I think these are three broad categories that you can use to just understand your audience a bit better, and that will give you a really good start in terms of coming up with content ideas. So now that you know your audience better, before you move on to actually creating the content, it's important to ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve, right? So one of the editorial core values that we have at Thirst is this: what we produce must encourage, equip, edify, or comfort. And that's from 1 Corinthians 14, verse 3. And this matters because it informs us on what kinds of stories we should pursue or how to angle a piece of content. I think I shared a bit about our example for COVID earlier. So where we decided not to do news updates on the cases that were linked to churches, but to really use the stories and the testimonies of patients who had experienced God's peace and hope to carry the message of the good news. So really, ultimately, every story carries a message, and it's important for us to consider what we want to say and what we want people to take away from it. So these are often the questions that we ask ourselves when we write or edit. The first, right, is this something that others can relate to? Is it a universal human problem? Are we representing God's character well? And the third, does it point people to the gospel and the hope we have in Jesus? And the fourth, does it challenge the reader to build their relationship with God and men? So for us, when we look at stories, be it our own stories or the stories that come in from contributors, these are some of the check boxes that we try to tick off, because sometimes if they are weak in one aspect, then we might actually ask the writer to go back and work on the story, or we might try to flesh out these other parts so that the story is more balanced. So once you have a clearer idea of who your audience is, what their needs are, and what you want to say, and that's when you can move towards developing a mix of content that addresses all of that. So there are so many different ways you can convey a message and many different forms your content can take, right? And the possibilities are really endless because God is the chief creative. But we thought we'd just share some ideas to start you off with. So for us at Thirst, personal opinion pieces are really our bread and butter. They comprise probably more than half of our content. And often the ideas for these pieces come from looking at what's happening around us, as shared earlier by John, what we see in culture, both active and passive. We look out for what we call discipleship moments, and we use these as a chance to share the biblical worldview. So for instance, with the recent race-related protests in the US that erupted over George Floyd's death, our editor Edric wrote an opinion on why we should fight for justice, but how this can also be done in a peaceful way. So that's an example of how we respond to global news. Locally, closer to home, I wrote a recent piece with regard to the campaign to light up Singapore in pink. Many young people, myself included, have friends who are same-sex attracted. And we're often caught between wanting to support our friends and what the Bible says on homosexuality. And so my article was really about navigating those tensions and asking the question, does not participating in Pink Dot mean we don't love our friends? And ultimately, can you stand by your friends and your convictions too? So just in case you're wondering, the answer is yes. So that's how examples of how we respond to global and local news. And then there are also plenty of opportunities for personal responses on pop culture. I mean, just look at how much interest there is around Korean drama and Kanye West, for instance. Jong was previously inspired by the marriage announcement of Song Joong Ki from Descendants of the Sun to write a piece on singleness and what it means to wait for the right one. Well, as we know, as it turned out, the romanticized love between the famous Song Song couple who you see in the photo did not work out, and they have since divorced. And as a side note, we also actually ran a piece on that news, and our story was called What to Do When Your OTP or Your One True Pairing Breaks Up. So often you see that engagement with such response pieces is really super high because they are newsy, they are current, but the catch is that it does require you to write a response pretty quickly because you don't want to wait until people are not talking about it anymore to publish. So that's, I think Jong also brought up that point that, you know, being able to turn around an article pretty quickly, we're talking about hours and days rather than like days and weeks. So I think it's that responsiveness and agility to be able to do that also. Well, I mean, if that's too difficult, an easier kind of story that's less time sensitive would be looking at trends within the church community. For instance, what's happening in cell groups or in youth ministry, what is the need of the hour. So Gabriel also wrote a piece which John referred to earlier. You know, we can't pick our cell groups like we are choosing cai fan, like we're buying cai fan. It's really about people picking and choosing cell groups, coming in and out, and really using that as a conversation starter on what are cell groups, you know, what is the point of cell groups and are we missing the point? Yeah. So the fourth category is another one that you can look at as well. So, you know, there are folks like Whole Life by Focus on the Family, there's Barna, World Vision. These organizations regularly publish survey results. So you can look at, you know, when these get released, right, you can look at highlighting key findings and use them as a chance to disciple. These are also a good source of stories for your content. And then another very common kind of content we publish is testimonies, where people share their personal struggles and triumphs. You know, if someone is not comfortable writing it, we usually interview them and write it up as a profile piece. So that one is, I think, quite straightforward. I won't really touch much about that. But another thing you can consider doing is how-to type of articles. So these are usually tips or guides, and they tend to do really well on Instagram. So to come up with ideas, I mean, just think about what questions your audience might have with regard to their faith and how you can develop content to address that. Which is why I covered earlier that it's really important to know their struggles, to know their aspirations, to know their passions, because then that, you know, could really just, you could do a whole FAQ and that could lead to like 10 story ideas. So the next category that is great is also Q&A interviews. They are really useful when you want to invite multiple people to share their views. For instance, for Valentine's Day, Jong did a series interviewing couples who met on Coffee Meets Bagel. And we use that as a way to talk about developing healthy relationships through dating apps. And then Gabriel also did a piece before the churches closed during circuit breaker, because we noticed that several young people were asking us about how they should respond to their parents if they face opposition in coming to church because of concerns over health and safety. So Gabriel actually spoke to a few youth leaders to get their views, and then we ran a Q&A just on this topic. So that's Q&A interviews. And the last thing is probably something that it's quite easy for many churches and ministries to do, because I think a number of you probably already organize events with amazing speakers throughout the year. So make the most of these opportunities to create content. I mean, a workshop, conference recaps are another kind of content that you can publish. So you might be wondering, you know, how feasible is it to produce all that content by yourself? Especially, I know just now someone asked earlier in the Q&A about how do you do it if you're a small church with a minimal team. I think the benefit of this whole thing is that you know, it's a kingdom project, so you are not alone, and you know, tap the resources of the kingdom. I've just listed 3 main sources of content that you can think about. You don't always have to create everything from scratch by yourself. So look at curated options, like the option of republishing from other Christian media, for example, us, YMI, Carlos, or churches that regularly publish content such as City News, Cornerstone. And don't forget that the social media pages of pastors and Christian thought leaders are a great source of content now as well. Even we ourselves, I think it's about a third of our content is curated. So we can't publish everything and create everything in-house as much as we would like as well. And we have a team of full-timers. So yeah, that's how we do it. We're really more than happy for our content to be shared, by the way. So please feel free to curate from Thirst and our other sister platforms like Salt and Light and Stories of Hope. And you know, your church and ministry might also have existing content from your own books or your sermons or videos that you can already take to adapt and repurpose for your website and social media as well. So don't forget those existing comms materials that you might already have. And then the third source of content is contributed. And for us, this is really about amplifying the voices of people from across the kingdom. And this would be from your ministry, for instance. So you can identify a few volunteers who are keen to be part of your writers network, or put out an open call for testimonies. And we actually find that most people are really happy to share their stories. I mean, if you want, you can even incentivize them, like through giving some kind of freebies, maybe like wallpapers. But most people are really just happy to share. Yeah. So, I mean, a question that we often get is also, how many people do you need on your content team? And the answer is not many. The essential skills are being able to write and edit, having an eye for visuals, and possessing some knowledge of social media. So if you know someone who can do all of that, you just need one person. But, you know, as I said earlier also, the issue of resourcing, I think it's really important to have young people to contribute to your team in some ways. They don't need to be full-timers, but they could be volunteers, because I think that's one way you can really get close to the needs on the ground. Finally, there's no point in creating content if you don't have a distribution strategy. So you really need to look at where you need to be on. And these are good platforms to look into for reaching young people with your content. A website is good because it acts as a central location for all the content you've ever created. People can also easily search for topics that they are more interested in. And of course, there are less limitations on character counts. As we know, Instagram has a limitation of 2,000 characters. Having said that, if you really had to choose between any of them, you should be on social media channels, because that's where the people are. Instagram in particular is the channel where we have the most number of followers. We just crossed over 20,000 recently, and Telegram is growing quite fast for us as well. So I just wanted to share an example of a story of how one story is posted across our different social media channels with slight tweaks to the content. We usually craft posts that are intended to drive people to read the full article on our website, except for Instagram, because people like to stay within the platform. So what we do is we try to summarize the story in the caption or within the graphics. And surprisingly, even though Instagram is such a visual-driven platform, we found that we get very good engagement with even text-heavy posts. But of course, they need to be dressed up nicely. So I think bottom line is, think about how much resources you have and come up with a strategy to engage. So with that, I want to end. I hope that I've given you an overview of what you need to consider when creating written content. And then Gabriel will take you through the final points of how you can get started.
Okay, thanks Gracia for that. My name is Gabriel and I am the copy editor and I am also a writer. I started about 3 years ago. Yeah, so that's a bit about me. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about the specifics. For us at Thirst, we're going to talk about the workflow. So in terms of our workflow, there are 5 main components to it. So you can see it there: planning, writing, editing, posting, and analysis. So in terms of planning, right? I would say don't underestimate the importance of working with calendars. So like there are great tools to help you in this regard, like Asana. But if you are looking for a free option, Google, Excel are also great. But the main point about calendars is that, beyond helping you to keep track of important dates, maintaining a calendar provides you an ongoing snapshot of what you've worked on, the content that you've worked on before, what you're currently working on, and what you're working towards. So with a calendar in mind, a quick glance will always get you up to speed on what the season is for you guys, whether it's Chinese New Year, whether it's National Day, whether it's Christmas. And here's the thing, when you release content that is relevant to the season, for instance, major exams or Father's Day, then half the battle is already won because people have an interest in what you have to say, right? So for us, as we plan the content around the season, we give ourselves as a team about 2 to 3 weeks of lead time. So this gives us enough time to conceptualize ideas, to pitch ideas at the pitch meetings, to refine these ideas, and then we also have enough time to actually execute the ideas, whether that's shooting a video, whether that's writing the article or conducting an interview. And then at the end stage, of course, you also have enough time for editing, for graphics, and post-production work. So this is the very start of our workflow. And I think I want to emphasize that as much as we do our best to plan and we do our best to scaffold ourselves, we also make sure that as a team, we can hold loosely to all the structures that we have in place. So what I mean is that we want to be able to be agile and to be able to respond to time-sensitive stories. Sometimes, breaking news happens like COVID, or when Billy Graham or Ravi Zacharias went home to be with the Lord. And for time sensitive stories like this, when they break, we want to be able to drop everything to, yeah, to work together and to get it out. Right. Okay, my internet connection is a bit wonky, so let me know if you lose me, and I'll repeat. Okay, so that's for planning. And now for writing, right? When it comes to writing, I believe that the first few paragraphs in an article are key. All right. We know that attention spans are getting shorter, and your article must hook the reader right from the start. If not, you lose them. So whether it's a personal anecdote or a hilarious story, whatever you put at the start must pique interest. Now, Gracia has mentioned this, but remembering who your audience is really is key. Uh, who are you talking to? So for us, we're very conscious that if it's a non-Christian that we are talking to, then you want to avoid Christian jargon or you want to avoid sounding too holy. What I mean by that is we might not, for example, put a huge Christian verse right at the start, as it may be difficult for non-Christians to engage with that. Rather, we find ways to ease them into the article, and then the God element comes in when they're invested, perhaps halfway or towards the end of the story. So we're very strategic about decisions like that. And for us, we're based in Singapore, so what we try and make sure is that what we produce in our website is local and remarkable. In all honesty, if we think about it, at this point of time, people can get teaching or feeding that is better than us, just hands down. Like you go on to Desiring God or the Gospel Coalition, and I mean, if we're being frank, the articles are probably better. So we don't compete with them. I mean, more power to them. But instead of competing, we go for things that can set us apart. So we have local voices and we have writing that is relevant to our Asian cultures and sensibilities. So I can write for Singaporeans, but I might not be able to write and understand the cultural mindsets of a Filipino or somebody from the UK. So we each have something unique to offer and bring to the table. So for us at Thirst, if you go through most of our articles, you will find three key elements, and that is before I came to Christ, number two, how I came to Christ, and number three, what my life is after I came to Christ. So that's before I came to Christ, how I came to Christ, and my life after. And this is actually the simplest structure for anyone's testimony. And in the conception phase, as we are pitching articles, if you have answers to these three questions, then you have a potential story. So that's one way to look at a skeleton for a story. And then finally, as writers and as editors, people always ask us at conferences or when we meet them, they always ask, hey, how do you guys keep generating content? Or how do you find the creativity to keep writing? And I think that, this really is the most important aspect of writing Christian content. As much as we can plan, as much as we can write well, um, at the end of the day, the most important thing is an ongoing relationship with God. Because as you journey with God in life, and as you speak to Him daily, He speaks to you daily, then there's always going to be something to say about, the things that are happening in the world, the things that you are experiencing. So in a sense, the well does run dry, But when it does, we top it up, and then it overflows onto our website and into other people's lives. So as we do that, as we carry that posture, as we remember that we are just a scribe or a mouthpiece, it takes a lot of the pride and pain away. For instance, when a piece doesn't do well, or when a piece goes viral, it's nothing to do with you in a sense. So that is very liberating for me. So that's for writing. So in terms of editing, when the article arrives at the editor, we clean up the work on the first level in terms of the basic things like grammar and formatting. So our main goal here is readability. We want people to be able to access the content easily. And then as editors, there are also the potential pitfalls that we look out for. For instance, does the writer need to be protected? Maybe he is a missionary in a country that is not open to Christianity, and then there might be repercussions for him if his identity is made known. Or maybe in the article, we might pick out things that we can omit for his safety while still keeping the story intact. Sometimes we go through articles that talk about controversial things, and that's good, but sometimes it might be wiser to rephrase certain ideas expressed or to just leave them out entirely. Yeah. And then there are also, when we edit, the biblical sensitivities. So we look at things like, is scripture being quoted out of context? Are verses being misapplied? So very honestly, we sometimes fall short in our own interpretations as well. But we do our best to make sure that God's word and His character are presented rightly as far as we can. So you're not in the visual workshop, so they're talking a bit more about this. But I can say that as an editor, visuals are often the first thing that anyone looks at. Um, so that's something we have to pay attention to as well. So, you go to Unsplash or you go to websites that have free images that you can use. For us, when we do that, we use personal images where possible to keep things localized. So that's like humans, I might not use I'm trying to keep it human, trying to keep it local. So when we source for images online, we're an Asian country, so we'll make sure to use Asian faces or bodies to retain that branding and positioning. So someone comes to our website, he if he sees a white guy, he might make certain assumptions about that, like, oh, this is Desiring God or this is TGC stuff. But when he sees like, oh, this is actually a Singaporean building, this is a Singaporean heartlands, he might understand that, oh, you know what, this might be something for me. So we are very intentional about that branding and that kind of positioning. So for the design team, when they work with graphics, they will operate as respectfully as possible, respect, to ensure that the graphic elements are not distracting. So for example, if we're talking about Pride or Pink Dot, or if we're talking about Black Lives Matter, we're very conscious about color use so as not to distract. So yeah, we just at the editorial level, we do our best to make sure that people are challenged by the content and not stumbled by it. So at the end of the day, I think that as editors, what we have in mind is that an article is somebody's story. It's somebody's precious story. And one way we respect and honor that is by trying to keep their voice in the edits. It's very easy to fix stuff and take out stuff so that it's become a weird version that doesn't sound like the original at all. And we want to avoid that. So as far as we can, the content should still sound like them. And I think that great editing is when you can marry that with achieving your spiritual objectives while actually impacting your target audience. So that's for editing. So now we talk a bit about posting. So we've talked about planning, writing, and editing. So now it's posting. Now, most people think that it ends at posting, but it's actually a bit more. Posting is an art, all right? You can have the greatest story in Singapore, in the Philippines, or wherever, but if your social media headline or your blurb, so a blurb is a short write-up to promote the work, okay? If your blurb or your headline or your caption isn't good, then few will ever read it. You lose people and they don't access that content. So what you want is a hard-hitting headline that helps your audience to get it. In around 10 words, they have to know what the article is about instinctively. So I'm gonna try and give us a few examples. So this is, I think, a good example of a headline and a blurb. So obviously we have, he's a well-known doctor slash marathoner. Singaporeans know him. and the blurb and the headline kind of play off each other. There's a kind of like a running thing going on in there, and people read it and they instantly understand what it's about. So a not so great example might be, uh, yeah, this one, lessons from a circuit breaker chef. So the blurb for this one is how I found the recipe for success. So I mean, it's all right, but you might not get the idea immediately based on just looking at this. I might be like, so success for what? Like cooking, or is it for life? So if the headline and the blurb make give you more questions than answers, and not in a good way, then you might not be on the right direction. All right, so your blurb really has to be punchy to draw readers in. We've mentioned that we're working in a culture where attention spans are really short. So it's got to be punchy, but at the same time, you can't summarize the story. You want to tease without giving everything away. You want to look for emotional haymakers, things that really like, wow, that's poignant or that's powerful, and hooks to reel your readers in. So, so these are things to consider as you write a headline and a blurb. It's not as simple as just posting the content. In fact, sometimes we spend more time writing the blurb and the headline than we actually edit the article. So that's a lot of thought goes into that. And in terms of posting, I think that timing is something that's often overlooked. So it helps to understand that certain posts do better for weekdays. For instance, work or school stories, and other posts might work better for the weekends, like stories to do with church or stories to do with your cell or your small group. And some stories work better in the daytime. Like we ran a campaign that we tried to get people to pray for a minute at lunchtime, so that works better in the day. And others do great at night, especially stories that touch on the latest K dramas or entertainment options, because that's when people are looking to be entertained or looking to chill out, and they might want to read that kind of content. So you will understand these consumption patterns the more you toy around with the content schedule, and especially when you look at the data, the hard numbers, which brings me to my next point, analyzing. So in the fifth part of our workflow is analysis. This is the end stage of our workflow. And for us, we're very aware of the fact that there is no way to improve on a product without knowing how well or badly it has done. So evaluation is really important. Now, to that end, data can be scary, but data is your friend. The numbers will tell you what you've put out that has resonated with your audience. All right. So there are a number of metrics that we look at. You want to look at reach. So reach is how many people have come into have come into contact with your content. These are just like, for example, 10,000 people came across the article on Facebook. That's the reach. You want to look at the metrics of where it's happened. Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it Telegram? And you want to look at things like, what's the age profile of the people who really enjoyed that article? Maybe I had a piece that went viral and I noticed that, oh, wait a second, everybody is above 50. So numbers like this will give you food for thought. And you want to look at things like, what time were most of them consuming content? So as you understand these factors, you will plan your content a bit better. Beyond reach, you can also look at engagement. Engagement, really simply defined, is just your shares, your likes, and your comments. It's when people care enough to show that, hey, I interacted with this, I might want to share it, or I liked it, or I commented on it. So engagement wise, you want to think about how the content has invited or discouraged engagement. So on your Facebook, for example, you post an article and it did well. You want to look at the numbers and you want to see how your blurb or headline helped you, or how you can do better in those aspects to invite people to engage with your content. Whether that's a call to, hey, share this with your friend if you found it useful, or whether it's a, hey, we have a giveaway, da 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 da, and then you see how people respond to that, and then that helps you to make strategic decisions. So really important as well. At the end of the day, you want to see how your conversion is doing. So your conversion is basically whether your call to action work. How many people are following through on this call to action? Whether it's click-throughs to your website or whether it's sign-ups to a campaign for a church camp, you need to see what worked for you, when it worked for you, how it worked for you, and if it's all reproducible. So for us at first, we have a number of tools that we use, but Google Analytics is the one that we use mostly, and we look at traffic to our website as part of conversion, and that actually gives us a good overview on what articles did well for that month. And if you don't have a website, I run the Telegram channel, so you can focus on statistics that the social media platform gives you. The Telegram channels, for instance, they have a growing and extensive statistics tab that can help you monitor and manage growth. So actually, GA and Telegram, all these things are actually free, and there are paid options as well. But you don't have to spend so much money to get into this. So I guess the final word would be that metrics are your friend, and that they really let you see whether your efforts are effective, and they help you to experiment with better practices for the future. So this is just a little short roundup on some of the workflow, some of the things that we do at Thirst. And as we've shared, we've only been in this for 4 years, and we've got a lot to learn. But this is what we've been through, and I hope that what we've shared has helped you so far. And right now, I'm on to my last slide, and that's a bit more time for Q&A. So that's great. I will hand this back to the host.
Okay, there are a few questions coming in now.
There are 2 questions now in the chat, so if you want to take it up. Yeah.
So actually, for Telegram, right, they used to not have a lot of analytics, but they now do actually. So if you go into your channel, and then you go under, actually statistics, you would see quite a comprehensive range of statistics. So I'm not sure whether that's something that Wenxuan you're already seeing, or you're looking for even more comprehensive analytics, because for us that's good enough for us. We found there's actually quite a lot of metrics that they actually track. Okay, Priscilla has a question on how do you split your roles in the content team? Yeah, so we have writers who just write. That's usually our interns. So all the editors also write. But then we primarily are the editing takes up most of our time. So because we get a lot of contributions, so as I mentioned, we also curate content from other publishers. So most of the time it's spent editing, and then we the editors double up as writers also, and also social media managers. So as Gabriel mentioned, he actually takes care of the Telegram channel. And then for us, all the stories actually go out both on Facebook, to a lesser extent Telegram, because we realized that since it's a mobile channel, right? It's quite sensitive in terms of like notifications, and people just don't want to be like spammed with so much content every day. So we reserve Telegram for like the really, really big stories, and those that are a bit more time sensitive, and those that we think that would work better for that channel, for that younger audience. And then we have our design team as well. So we have a visual editor who actually takes care of Instagram. And the reason for that is because it's such a visual platform. So as I shared earlier, Instagram has a bit of a different strategy in that it really needs its own dedicated like management, because the stories that we run on our website cannot be exported wholesale to Instagram. It has to be redesigned and cut down to a certain extent as well because of the character limit. So we have someone who's design trained to just take care of Instagram, and she happens to be quite a good editor as well. So thank God for that. That's why she's good at cutting down the stories. I think I would just cover a related question, which is are graphics all originally created by our team? Yes and no. Like so Nicole, who was in the session earlier, she's actually trained in animation, so she's really good in illustration. So if you see any illustrations, that's all usually by her or by any of our other two designers. We do also use stock images. As Gabriel pointed out, we try to choose those that are more localized with Asian faces, so that it just makes it a bit more, local and closer to home. And then we also take our own photos. Sometimes there are some topics where it's like really hard to find a relevant image online, maybe say like mental health or suicide. And so we go with something a bit more conceptual, and so we take our own photos as well. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question. Gabriel, do you want to answer the question on how do you respond to comments on the various channels, especially when they have opposing views and may veer towards being confrontational?
Yeah, so I manage the Facebook side of things as well when people comment on our site. And I think that what really helps is just exercising your discernment. And the honest truth is that not every comment is worth replying to. Some people just want to get a reaction or just want to troll you. But at the same time, you want to be aware that, even if he's saying something nasty, you might have an opportunity, or it might be a bridge to talk about, something that's more spiritual. So for us, we weigh these things with discernment. And I think most of the time, if I feel that this person didn't express his view so nicely, but he had something that it came from a place in his heart, we might just Facebook message him privately and have that conversation one-on-one. So I think very honestly, I think that, our site's motto is honest conversations. So we want to be true to that. So if they're up for honest conversation, even if it's a difficult one, we will take them up on it. But if it's not edifying, if it's not encouraging, if, engaging in a discussion on Facebook would not be productive, that is not something we would do. Yeah. But for the most part, I found that people on Facebook are not as antagonistic as they would be on other websites that I've noticed. I'm not sure why that's the case for our viewers or our readers, but for the most part, it's been pretty civil. And if people have something to say, usually they DM us on IG, or they DM us on the Facebook Messenger, and we just take it from there.
Jong, do you want to answer Ariel's question? How do you tread the fine line when deciding whether to break controversial topics, or how to go about doing it?
I think I mentioned just now as well, it's like to go slow, right? To not like just jump straight into it. I mean, but if anything, like we always have in the Thirst office, we have a safe group of people who like we can discuss this first with. So it's never like, oh, like I have a topic that I never even run it past my managing editor. I just go and write it already. Yeah. So I think when it finally comes down to us as a team deciding whether we should talk about them, it is of course like governed by like, is everyone talking about it? Like, is this a big enough thing that we should say something? Do we have something to say? Because it may not, there's tons of news all the time, right? There's nations are in conflict, things are, and global news is there all the time, but we don't always respond because sometimes we don't have something to say. Like it's something that for maybe someone has already said it better. And so it might be like, we're also watching out for thought leaders in our circles, like someone wrote a really good like opinion piece, and like we if it's biblically sound as well, we'll be like, okay, this person is of the right spirit, is saying it in a way that's not antagonistic, is not trying to like scold everybody, that's going to be like, we want to curate good content and good thought leaders who we can echo and get behind as well. So that's usually us. But as I said, we come together as a team. We do pray about it. It's difficult. Controversial topics such as when you talk about LGBT, racism, these are tough. Even sometimes talking about divorce can be also a bit tough, like even these things, because that the arguments of social constructs, the arguments of context, are there. But if the church needs discipling, we need to be at the forefront of that. If we are at the front line of culture, right? So if the church needs to disciple, because people are talking about it already, right? Then we need to say something. But the thing is that if no one's actually really talking about it, right? For example, like I can't think of one at the top of my mind, but maybe Gracia can remember. I think there are sometimes that like some things that have happened that like we knew happened, but actually no one really picked it up in Singapore.
Not very sure what exactly she's referring to, but I think she's talking about how like there are issues happening abroad that we decided not to cover. So I think another criteria for us is how close to home is it, and how and whether people will be able to relate. I think was it I think like we also kind of we are not so quick to jump on hot topics, and we kind of wait a while to see whether within our circles there's someone who would make sense to actually speak about that. I remember, like, I think it was Greta Thunberg when that was huge, and then we were like, okay, who actually, you know, is can we speak to that actually has a heart for environmental issues, for instance. So like none of us in the team were like, you know, able to do that, but we knew of a few people who possibly be able to talk about it, so we approached them, and in the end we did manage to get someone who to share. Yeah, so I think that's how we kind of take controversial issues. If it has a personal if there's a personal angle that we can take on that. For instance, like Gabriel, during the O-level season, when the first O-level paper started, Gabriel shared his own personal testimony about his academic journey from PSLE, not very great PSLE score, to all the way, like, you know, graduating from uni and being this job. So he had a personal story to offer, so that made good sense for him to write it, you know. So I think it's really also looking at what our own personal journeys, and are we able to share something that we've actually experienced before in our personal journey. So I think I want to cover, because I think Amanda and Rachel has the same question. How do you make content about church sermons and sermon reflections engaging for the youths? John, do you want to say anything about that? You're muted.
Sorry, I was just replying to everyone to say sorry, I got logged out. I think like I'm getting censored. Oh no, like Zoom is like, oh my goodness, stop talking. Yeah, sorry, repeat the question again.
How do you make content about church sermons and sermon reflections engaging for the youths?
Okay, I think here it's again like spend time learning the language, like, you know, like learn the way that people are speaking, the kinds of, like, you know, the lingo that people are speaking in, so that you don't use words like lit and, you know, like like all those like different things that people are talking like in like our less formal media, right? Understand the language, and then sometimes like put it in, you know. I think that for us, when we take sermons, it's number one, of course, making it clear, right? We want to communicate clearly. We also can communicate in a fun way because you want to have engagement, right? You want to keep people listening. And I think one thing that keeps people listening is when you speak in a voice, a writer's voice, that clearly shows that I know this, you know, like this is also, I'm not randomly using like young people speak for the sake of it, but I know how to use it well. I think a good example, although this is kind of like a bit political, but Tan Cheng Bok, when he was doing his whole like Insta Live thing and like learning all these crazy language together with everyone, like people actually really appreciated it. He's understanding the word woke, for example, you know, like, like he's using it and he's trying to use it, and people respected that because it was just funny, you know. It's funny and it was also cute, and he used it rightly, I guess, you know. After a while he got it, he understood it, and it showed that he came down to the level of like, I may not always be at the same age. And I think as us, we also, as we get older, we also go like, I'm also not really like a teen now, but it doesn't mean that I have to completely remove myself and speak from up here, right? I speak about here wisdom wise, but also I want to show that I can speak eye level, you know, like level, like person to person with you, without just, you know, like throwing jargon, throwing all these like verses as if you understand everything, but taking the time to, like, to, for us at least, we don't just say like, oh, King David said that in the Bible, and like you're thinking like people reading it may not even know who King David is, or like they may not even know this specific incident that he went through. You know, like take the time to break it down for people such that it communicates clearly, and then in a way that's also fun and simple to understand. I think that's the one way that sermons can be translated in a way that's bite-sized also for us. So it's not just the whole sermon per se. It's us picking out certain things that we want to point out and teach people, yeah, that can be taken in easily.
I think I just want to add on to that. Thanks, John. In terms of presentation, I mean, there different ways that you can do that. I mean, I know like sermons, just, I mean, I don't know how long your church sermons can be range from 20 minutes to 45 minutes, right? So I think so for articles on thirst, they usually are about 500 words to like 1,000 words. But you know, sometimes we push the boundaries on it a bit, like 1,000+ words. So the thing is that you really need to find an angle in the sermon where you think would best speak to your use. So you may not be republishing the whole thing, but it's really like adapting from the sermon. It could be an excerpt, or it could be just adapting the whole thing. I don't know, putting it into a listicle, for instance, like 5 things we learned about evangelism. You know, are just finding ways to make it a bit, not like a whole full entire sermon, because I think no one's really going to read that. But use Instagram. I mean, use like what the example I showed you earlier, where, you know, we put the text into the graphics, but it was really like bite size, like, you know, point form, like, you know, really the gist of it. So I think no one's really going to read like a 2,000, 3,000 word article, which is from a sermon lah. So I think you just have to find ways to present it in a way that is small nuggets of truth. I don't know, maybe you could even do like a Q&A style, like break it down to 5 questions that were answered through the sermon, for instance. You might also want to another thing I wanted to add was that I think it makes a difference if you tell it in first person versus like trying to do it in third person. I think with a lot of the articles on thirst are first person, actually, because it's a lot more engaging that way, because you feel like you're being, someone's actually really talking to you rather than like reported speech. Yeah, so that's another way that you can quite easily make it more engaging for your audience.
I was going to add something about tone as well, the writer's voice and tone. Like what I meant by speaking up here from wisdom, but also being able to come down, it's about speaking in a way that isn't just like, there's authority, but it's not like just beating someone over the head with like, oh, just do this, we should do that, you know, you should do this. It's the way, I mean, the way that you speak to someone, think about it, like even as you write, think about the way that someone's receiving and hearing it, even in a reading, like kind of hearing manner, you know, because if certain ways of writing, certain kind of tones that you're writing with can turn people away from what the message is as well. So how can we make it accessible and friendly and in a way that people will receive and learn something, you know, and not be like, whoa, like I feel I'm getting scolded through this text, you know. I mean, like, although there are of course moments where we can be firm, can like, have conviction, those are important. But yeah, tone, I think writer's tone is huge, and it takes practice as well. Like, let someone else read it when you write something. Sometimes having a second eye can really help, because it comes across so naturally to us. We're just like writing into a void sometimes, right? Writing a blank document. But when it finally goes out into that space, how do people receive it?
Blair, you had a question about how do you draw the line in practicing biblical values and at the same time promoting ethical and legal standards in covering or airing such news content. Do you have an example that you're thinking of?
Blair, you may unmute yourself and speak into it if you want to clarify the question.
Yeah, because I'm trying to understand like the question better also. Okay. I think Blair is saying go ahead with other questions. Okay, I'll answer this question from Jasmine. She's asking, it seems that some contents can be written by youth and there are other contents which really do need experienced folks. Yes and no. I think, I mean, personal testimonies, definitely, you know, everyone can share, right? But when it comes to, I guess, maybe a bit more teaching material, not everyone, depending on, I guess, like how well they know the word also, and spiritual maturity. Yeah. They may not be ready to be able to share or have a biblical response to it. So I think those are the times where, you know, doing interviews, like, you know, seeking expert views, like Q&A with like pastors, youth leaders, like would be really valuable. And I mean, you guys, if you work in the church, then you have even more access to like, you know, these leaders than we do. So even for us, there are like some things that we're like, okay, I think we should speak to like, you know, a pastor about this, because like I don't think like any of us are able to really address it well. Yeah, so I think there are different, I guess you're right in some sense, like there are different types of content would be more better suited for a different kind of writer would be better suited for it. Jong, do you want to take the question from Priscilla on the pros and cons of having a church-wide Facebook page versus Facebook pages for different ministries like youth and adults? Because she's saying that the digital marketing best practices for companies is to integrate and bring audiences onto one Facebook page and not divide resources among multiple Facebook pages.
I guess the pros and cons off the top of my head immediately is the pros is that you will have when you produce content, the mass that you're producing for, more people will get it, and you don't have to go and like try and split it up. Of course, as in the pros of having a Facebook wide page, church-wide Facebook page. But the thing is that for brands, right, like even when it comes like brands that come underneath that, it does help to have like their own pages, because you're speaking very different languages to some extent, you know, like the way you craft content, the language you're using, the speaking voice you're using, right, the words that you're using change. Like for example, as a younger audience, the reason why like we ourselves, there's Thirst and then there's Salt and Light, right? So Salt and Light is a slightly older audience for the marketplace, for those who are working already. It's definitely not for students, it's definitely not for teens, you know, it's people all the way up to anything above that, you know, the age of, if I'm not wrong, 25, right? And for us, it's, and our target audience is 18 to 35. So of course, the language that we speak in the minute when we're crafting, as Gabriel talked about, the reason why sometimes it's so hard to craft captions and blurbs is because we can't just, we also need to think of what would speak very specifically to that age group that we are targeting, right? So that's why, and if I put this out onto on Salt and Light, and I can use, like for us, we use emojis, right? We also speak in certain, we also have a bit of like free hand to be creative about the way we speak, a bit more young, a bit more like, use like lingo and stuff like that. And in a way that we know that people are sorry, like people are not going to get it, right? They're going to, what? What's this thing, And they miss the message, because the idea and the goal of every single message you put out is that someone receives it, right? And actually clicks in. We want them to click in to read the story. And so that's why when you have the con of having just a church-wide one, is that you might be just saying certain things like it's like a pulpit, right? So just saying, but you're missing out a lot of topics that the younger, for example, a younger or even an older, crowd will be interested in. For example, talk about legacy, right? For an older crowd. Right, you talk about this, sometimes the young people don't really get it. Like, what end of life? People at the age want to talk about dating and like, can I date a non-Christian? But you don't talk about that to the older people as well, because they're like, this ain't really my thing, right? So there is wisdom in separating it. But yes, you do need it does. The reason why they don't always do it, and it's because you can't, right? You don't have enough people to run each page. It does take a bit of manpower, even if it's one person. That's a lot of work, for one person, and one person is dedicated to one page. It does help, but in the end, a team, as I mentioned, a team always is great to have. Yeah, so those are the pros and cons immediately. Yeah, so I mean, I would recommend, yes, have different pages, and yes, also have one main one. It's okay if you have the manpower, go for it, right? Because different teams bring a different spirit to reach specifically each of the different audiences. It really, really works. Yeah.
I agree also, and just to add, that's the reason why we've so recently we launched Stories of Hope, which is really we are just parceling out all our content that is more evangelistic, that will speak to a non-believer, onto Stories of Hope, because we realized that after like 4 years, we're trying to speak to both kinds of audiences on our site, both non-believers and believers, and sometimes it's difficult, because you're like, you can't be too Christian, and then like you're worried that your Christian content will alienate the other type of reader as well. So I think for us, we're now trying to do that a bit more clearly, where Thirst is clearly more discipleship of Christians, and Stories of Hope is really more outreach to non-believers. And so, I mean, just for your background, I mean, we've even come down to that, so I think Jong's point is that, yeah, it's really true. If you want to meet the needs of your audience, I think a key part of that is being able to have a very clearly defined audience, and then to be able to tailor your tone of voice and tailor your content to suit that. Sorry, Gabriel, you were saying something?
Yeah, I can just share that, it's good to remember where your audience is. So I don't see strategic purpose in having a Facebook page for youths for the sake of it if they are not on the platform. So if they are somewhere else, whether it's TikTok or whether it's IG, it would make more sense to have it over there. So I think I say this from experience because my own church actually had to shut down the youth church page because things were looking a bit sad. I mean, there's no point you put like an article out or you put an announcement out and there's like one like, one share, like for weeks on end. I think that's not a good look either for the church. So I think it's really about understanding where the kids are or where your old folks are. So if it's an elderly demographic, then definitely Facebook will be the place. But if it's you want to, I mean, at the end of the day, the purpose is to get information to them and to build community, right? So you really want to go where they are, and if that's TikTok, assuming it's still legal in your country, then that might be the option. Or if it's IG, then it's IG. Or if it's a Telegram channel, it's a Telegram channel. So I think a good start would be to find out, get on the ground and see where the people are, and then apply your efforts accordingly.
Yeah, actually a question on if you're not like able to engage with like say global trends or like global news or pop culture like K-pop, K-drama, what can you do? So I think while we have shared that it's quite important to engage with culture, to make cultural references, I think there's a lot that you can do in the space even without actually mentioning, whether it's doing a review of a K-drama or whether it's, talking about, the racial protests in the US. There's lots and lots that you can disciple on, evergreen topics like relationships, career, school, without having to actually bring in, these examples. So if you really, really find it very difficult to use something that's happening in the news to talk about these issues, I think at the heart of it, you can still disciple on these. I mean, these are really like topics that everyone faces every day. So I think you can really still share about it. You don't have to, respond the way we do at this, because I know that it's not easy for people to kind of like just drop everything and like, okay, I have to respond to what's happening, like with the racial riots or like Black Lives Matter. So we do understand that, and yeah, so don't get discouraged if you think that that's something that you're not very comfortable with doing or that is too sensitive. I think there's lots that you can do in the space where discipleship is concerned without having to actually bring those in if you really, really cannot make the connection. So lastly, as Jong says, if you have more questions, feel free to drop us a direct message on our Facebook or Instagram and follow our channels. So I hope this was useful for everyone. And thank you for joining